Cure me. You? I'll pay 1 million, laughed the rich businessman. Get the money ready, said the boy. Marcus Sterling stared at the 12-year-old boy standing in his executive office doorway. Disheveled hair, simple clothes, small hands clutching a worn backpack. Mr. Sterling, I can cure your disease. The billionaire businessman let out a bitter laugh. At 58, with terminal cancer, he'd spent millions on the world's best doctors. And now a child. You? Cure me? Marcus scoffed, adjusting his $50,000 suit. I'll pay $1 million if you can do it. The boy didn't flinch. His eyes sparkled with unsettling confidence. Prepare the money, he said simply. How had this child gotten past the 80-story building security? Marcus pressed the intercom button, irritated. Sarah, how did this kid get up here? Silence from the other side. The boy approached the Italian mahogany desk, ignoring the Harvard and MIT diplomas on the walls. My name is David. I came because it has to be today. Marcus felt a chill. No doctor had said that, but yesterday's tests confirmed he had only weeks left. Little boy, get out of here before I call security, Marcus snapped, but when he looked back, David was gone. The silence was deafening. Marcus pressed the intercom again. Sarah. No response. He walked to the door, peering down the marble hallway. Empty. The elevators were 200 feet away, and he'd only looked away for seconds. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Marcus, it's David. We meet tomorrow at Central Park, bench near the lake, 3 p.m. Wait, how did you... The line went dead. Marcus slumped into his leather chair, hands trembling. The morphine was wearing off, and the familiar fire spread through his abdomen. He opened his desk drawer, revealing bottles of prescription painkillers that barely helped anymore. The boy's words echoed, "It has to be today." How could a child know what his oncologists at Sloan Kettering had discovered just yesterday? The cancer had spread faster than anyone predicted. Dr. Morrison's words still rang in his ears. 3 weeks, maybe less. Marcus had built a $5 billion empire by reading people, by knowing when someone was lying or desperate. But that boy, there was something different. No desperation, no fear, just certainty. He pulled up the building's security footage on his computer. The cameras showed him alone in his office for the past hour. No child anywhere. His assistant Sarah finally responded to the intercom. Mr. Sterling, you called? Did you see a boy come up here? No, sir, I've been at my desk all afternoon. The elevator logs show no visitors. Marcus stared at his reflection in the darkened window. 60 floors below, New York bustled with life he'd soon leave behind. He'd fought his way up from Detroit streets, clawing past anyone who stood in his way. The cancer didn't care about his net worth. The boy's phone number was still on his screen. He tried calling back. The number you have dialed is not in service. What happened next would force Marcus to question everything he thought he knew about power, healing, and the thin line between desperation and hope. Marcus Sterling hadn't slept in 72 hours. The boy's impossible appearance haunted him more than the cancer eating through his pancreas. He'd grown up in Detroit's roughest neighborhood, son of a Ford assembly worker. At 12, he'd watched his father lose everything when the plant closed. The humiliation of food stamps, charity handouts, neighbors' pitying looks. Never again, young Marcus had sworn, watching his father break down at the kitchen table. And he'd kept that promise. Built Sterling Industries by crushing competitors, buying out family businesses, foreclosing on homes when people couldn't pay. Every ruthless decision was armor against ever being helpless again. Now, despite his billions, he felt 12 years old again. The oncology reports covered his desk like death sentences. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma, metastasized to liver and lungs. The Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, even experimental treatments in Switzerland, nothing worked. We've done everything possible, Dr. Morrison had said with practiced sympathy. Focus on making peace with those you love. Marcus had laughed bitterly. Love. He'd systematically eliminated everyone who might have cared. 3 ex-wives who'd left when business consumed him. No children. Too much liability. Friends. Everyone wanted something from him. He'd traded his soul for success, and now death was collecting. The boy's voice echoed, "I can cure your disease." Marcus pulled up his investigative team's preliminary report on David Mitchell. Age 12. Orphaned 2 years ago when his parents died in a car accident. Lives with his aunt in a cramped Bronx apartment. Straight A's at St. Mary's Elementary. But there was something else. Every weekend, David volunteered at Sunset Manor Nursing Home. The testimonials were remarkable. "That boy has a gift." Mrs. Patterson hadn't spoken in months, but after David's visits she started talking again. "He helped my grandfather find peace before passing. Don't know how, but the fear left his eyes." Marcus closed the file. His rational mind rejected everything about this situation, but desperation made fools of even the smartest men. At 2:30 p.m. the next day, Marcus Sterling, who'd never begged for anything, drove his Bentley toward Central Park. But there was something Marcus didn't know about David Mitchell, something that would shatter every assumption about healing, power, and the debts we owe to our past. David sat exactly where he'd promised, feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs from a paper bag. He looked up as Marcus approached, no surprise in his young eyes. "You're early," David said without looking at his watch. "Listen, kid, I don't know what game this is, but—" "No game." David finally met his gaze. "Your father was Robert Sterling, worked at River Rouge plant, lost his job October 15th, 1976. Marcus froze. Few people knew those details, and none of them were 12 years old. "You were my age then. Same age I am now." "How do you know this?" David smiled sadly. "Because my grandfather was your neighbor, Thomas Mitchell, remember him?" The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thomas Mitchell. The old man who'd brought groceries when they had nothing, who'd fixed their broken heater during that brutal winter, who'd never asked for anything in return. "Mr. Mitchell told me about the angry boy next door. Smart but hurt. Said you'd do something important someday." Marcus remembered fragments now. The kind old man with calloused hands who'd somehow known exactly when they needed help most, who'd slipped $20 bills to Marcus's mother for the boy's school supplies. "He died 5 years ago," David continued quietly, "alone in a nursing home. Medicaid covered the funeral. 3 people came." The words cut deep. Marcus had known. His private investigators tracked everyone from his past. He could have helped the old man who'd helped him survive childhood's worst moments. "Why should I care about that now?" "Because you're going to die the same way he did, rich but alone." Marcus stood abruptly, fury masking the guilt. "I don't take moral lectures from children." But David was already walking away, his small figure disappearing into the crowd of afternoon joggers and tourists. "Tomorrow, same time, if you want to live." The haunting began that night. In his penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and empty rooms, Marcus couldn't escape the memory of Thomas Mitchell's weathered face, the way he'd always known exactly when to appear with help. There was something about that boy, something that made Marcus's billions feel like fool's gold. Marcus hired the best private investigator in New York. Within 24 hours, he had a complete dossier on David Mitchell, and what he read disturbed him more than any cancer prognosis. David Mitchell, age 12. Parents died in a head-on collision 2 years prior. Drunk driver never caught. Lives with his Aunt Maria in a 2-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx. Honor roll student at St. Mary's Elementary. No medical training, no family history of healing abilities. But there was more. Every weekend for the past year, David volunteered at 3 different nursing homes across the city. The reports were consistent and unsettling. This child has something special. Residents who haven't spoken in months start talking after his visits. David spent time with Mrs. Rodriguez before she passed. She died peacefully, smiling. Her family said she'd been terrified of death for weeks. He doesn't do anything medical, just talks to them, listens. Somehow they get better. Marcus closed the file, his hands shaking. His condition was deteriorating rapidly. This morning he'd collapsed in his bathroom, blood staining the marble floor. The doctors had quietly revised their timeline. 10 days, maybe less. He'd spent $50 million on medical treatments. flown to Germany for experimental immunotherapy, tried every alternative medicine guru from Tibet to Brazil. Nothing. Now a 12-year-old boy was his last hope. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus Sterling, who'd spent 40 years believing money solved everything, was now powerless. The boy who'd grown up receiving charity was now offering it. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in decades. He called his estranged half-sister Rebecca in Detroit. "Marcus, is everything okay? Do you remember Thomas Mitchell, our old neighbor?" Long pause. "Mr. Mitchell, of course. He practically kept us alive that winter when Dad lost his job." "Why? What happened to him?" "He moved away after his wife died. I heard he struggled financially." "Marcus, why are you asking about this now?" He couldn't explain. Instead, he asked, "Rebecca, do you think people can really change, like fundamentally change who they are?" "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" He hung up without answering. That night, for the first time in 30 years, Marcus Sterling got on his knees. He didn't know how to pray anymore, but desperation has its own language. In the morning, something would happen that would force Marcus to confront the greatest enemy of his life, his own refusal to believe in anything he couldn't control. At the second meeting, David brought an old photograph. Marcus recognized himself immediately. 12 years old, skinny, standing beside his father in front of their modest house. "My grandfather kept this for 40 years. Why?" "He said you'd be important someday, that God had plans for you." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Plans? I built an empire by destroying others. Where was God when I needed him?" David looked directly into his eyes. "Maybe you're the one who walked away from him." Something in the simplicity of that statement disarmed Marcus. For the first time in decades, he felt like that vulnerable 12-year-old boy again. "How exactly do you plan to cure me? Laying on of hands? Prayer circles?" "No," David smiled. "I'm going to teach you to heal yourself." "That's impossible. I have terminal cancer." "You have terminal loneliness," David corrected. "The cancer is just a symptom." Marcus wanted to scoff but remembered his doctor's words. Chronic stress and emotional isolation are significant factors in disease progression. A 12-year-old doesn't understand oncology. "I understand dying," David said quietly. "I see it every day at the nursing homes. People don't die from disease alone. They die from regret, from carrying too much pain for too long." David opened his worn backpack and pulled out dozens of handwritten letters. "These are from people you hurt. I found them all, spent 2 years tracking down everyone from your past." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I don't want to read—" "None of them hate you," David interrupted. "Not one. They all forgive you, some even thank you because overcoming what you did made them stronger." Marcus picked up the first letter with trembling hands. The name made his stomach drop. John Peterson, the first employee he'd fired in 1985. "Dear Marcus, if you ever read this, know that I don't hold any anger." "How did you get this?" "I visited Mr. Peterson last month. He wrote it right there, said he'd been hoping to tell you for years." Marcus stared at the stack of letters, each one representing a person he'd dismissed as collateral damage in his climb to power. "Why would you do this?" "Because my grandfather taught me something before he died. He said the sickness that kills the body starts in the soul, and yours has been sick for 40 years. Marcus spent the next 3 days reading every letter. Each one was a knife to his conscience and balm to his wounded soul simultaneously. Jennifer Walsh, the single mother whose house he'd foreclosed on in 1998. That foreclosure forced me to move in with my sister. Best thing that ever happened. My kids grew up with their cousins, and I met my husband there. Tom Bradley, whose family restaurant he'd bought and demolished for a parking lot. Losing the restaurant broke my heart, but it freed me to travel. I've cooked in kitchens across Europe. Found myself in ways I never could have staying in one place. Story after story of people who'd transformed their pain into purpose, people who'd grown stronger because of, not despite, what he'd done to them. But the weight of 40 years of ruthless decisions was crushing him. Marcus found himself vomiting blood more frequently. His skin had taken on a yellow tinge. The cancer was accelerating, as if his body was finally surrendering to the emotional toxins he'd carried for decades. Dr. Morrison called with new test results. "Marcus, I'm moving you to hospice care. There's nothing more we can do medically." "How long?" "Days, not weeks." That night, Marcus sat in his study surrounded by the letters. 47 people whose lives he'd disrupted. 47 people who'd forgiven him. 47 people who'd become better humans because of their struggles. And then there was him, the only one who'd become worse. His phone rang. "David. How are you feeling, Mr. Sterling?" "Like I'm drowning in my own choices." "Good. That means you're finally feeling the weight you've been carrying." I read them all. Every letter. "I don't understand how they can forgive me." "Because forgiveness isn't about you," David explained patiently. "It's about them choosing not to carry poison in their hearts. But there's still one person you haven't heard from." "Who?" "The one person you hurt most. The one whose forgiveness you need before you can heal." Marcus scrolled through the letters. "I think I have everyone here." "No, you don't. This person has been waiting 46 years for an apology. Longer than anyone else." "I don't understand." "Tomorrow I'll bring someone to meet you. Someone who's been watching you suffer for decades. Someone who remembers when you weren't the man you became." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his reflection in the window. His gaunt face, hollow eyes, the shadow of the man he'd built himself into. Behind him, the letters scattered across his desk like pieces of a broken life waiting to be reassembled. He had less than a week to live, according to the doctors. But David seemed to think there was still someone left to face. Someone who held the key to healing that had nothing to do with medicine. The next morning, David arrived with an old mirror in a simple wooden frame. Not ornate like everything else in Marcus's penthouse, but humble, weathered. "This belonged to my grandfather. He left it specifically for you." Marcus examined the mirror. The silver had spots and streaks, creating an imperfect reflection. "I don't understand the significance." "My grandfather was different from other people," David began, settling into the chair across from Marcus. "He could see things, feel things. When he helped your family during that winter, it wasn't just kindness." "What do you mean?" "He saw your future, the anger building inside 12-year-old Marcus, the walls you'd build, the man you'd become, but he also saw who you could still be." Marcus felt a chill. "That's impossible." "Is it? You hired investigators to research me." "Did they tell you about the nursing homes? About how people heal around me?" Marcus nodded reluctantly. "It's not magic, it's just... Some people carry light, and some people carry darkness. But the darkness isn't permanent. It's just accumulated pain that never got released." David stood and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. "My grandfather spent his last years in that nursing home, helping other people die peacefully. The staff called him a miracle worker. But he always said his greatest failure was the boy next door who'd chosen anger over healing. He thought I was his failure. He thought you were his unfinished work. That's why he saved that mirror. Said someday you'd need to see past the man you built and remember the boy you buried." Marcus looked at the mirror again. This time he tried to see beyond his current reflection. Tried to remember who he'd been before the armor, before the walls, before the empire built on others' destruction. "The people in those letters forgave me because they moved on, but how do I forgive myself for 40 years of choices? By apologizing to the one person you've never acknowledged, the 12-year-old boy who made one promise that destroyed his life." "What promise?" "Never to be vulnerable again, never to need anyone, never to let anyone close enough to hurt you." David turned from the window. "That promise turned you into exactly what you feared most, someone who hurts others before they can hurt you." Marcus felt his chest tightening, but not from the cancer. This was different, deeper. "What happened to my grandfather in his final days taught me something important. Healing doesn't come from medicine or miracles. It comes from finally being honest about who we really are underneath all our defenses." David placed his small hand on the mirror. "Are you ready to meet the person you've been running from for 46 years? The mirror seemed to shimmer, and for just a moment, Marcus could swear he saw a frightened 12-year-old boy staring back at him. "I want you to hold this mirror," David said softly, "and look at yourself, but this time don't see Marcus Sterling, the billionaire. See Marcus, the 12-year-old boy who watched his father cry." Marcus took the mirror with shaking hands. His reflection looked back, gaunt, dying, empty. "I don't see anything different." "Because you're still wearing the mask. Close your eyes first. Remember October 15th, 1976, the day your father lost his job. What did you feel that night?" Marcus closed his eyes. The memory came flooding back with unexpected clarity. His father at the kitchen table, unemployment papers scattered around him. His mother crying quietly at the stove. And him, 12 years old, hiding in the hallway. "I felt terrified," Marcus whispered, "like our whole world was falling apart." "What else?" "Ashamed. The other kids at school knew. I could see it in their faces." "And what did you promise yourself that night?" The memory hit him like a physical blow. He'd gone to his room, looked at himself in his dresser mirror and made a vow. "I'll never be weak like Dad. I'll never let anyone make me feel small again. Open your eyes now. Look in the mirror." Marcus opened his eyes, and this time he saw something different. Behind his adult features he could glimpse the frightened child he'd been. "That boy," David said gently, "has been waiting 46 years for you to tell him it's okay to be scared. That being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. But I'm not that boy anymore. You've never stopped being that boy. You just buried him under 40 years of armor. Every ruthless business decision, every wall you built, every person you hurt, you were trying to protect that scared 12-year-old. Marcus stared at his reflection, and suddenly the truth was undeniable. Every conquest, every enemy crushed, every relationship destroyed. It all traced back to that terrified child who'd sworn never to feel powerless again. "He's been trapped inside you all this time," David continued, "carrying all that fear and shame. He never got to grow up properly because you decided he was too weak to survive." Tears started flowing down Marcus's cheeks. "I was so angry at him, at his weakness. He wasn't weak. He was just a child who needed protection and love. Instead, you made him your prisoner." How do I reach him?" David smiled with surprising warmth. "The same way my grandfather would have. The same way you reach any hurt child. You apologize for abandoning him. You tell him he's safe now. You tell him it's okay to feel scared sometimes." Marcus looked deeper into the mirror, and for the first time in decades, spoke to the boy he'd left behind. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone with all that fear." The reflection seemed to shimmer, and Marcus could swear he saw the 12-year-old boy nod back at him. Something fundamental shifted in his chest. Not the cancer, something deeper, something that had been frozen for 46 years, was finally beginning to thaw. "There's something else," David said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about my grandfather's last words." Marcus was still staring at the mirror, tears streaming down his face, when David's tone changed. "He didn't just tell me about you, Mr. Sterling. He told me about your father, too." "My father? What about him?" David pulled out another photograph from his backpack. This one showed a group of men in work clothes standing outside a factory. Marcus recognized his father immediately, but there was another face that made his blood run cold. "That's my great-grandfather, standing right next to your father. They worked together for 15 years at River Rouge." Marcus studied the photo more carefully. The resemblance between the older man and David was unmistakable. "They weren't just co-workers," David continued. "They were best friends. My great-grandfather was devastated when the plant closed and your family moved away." "I don't understand. If our families were connected, why didn't your grandfather ever mention this?" "Because there's more to the story. The day your father lost his job, my great-grandfather was the shift supervisor. He had to choose between saving his own position and saving your father's job." Marcus felt the world tilt. He chose to fire my father? The company was downsizing. Someone had to go. My great-grandfather had 5 kids to feed. Your father only had 1. The betrayal cut deeper than any cancer. So the man who helped us afterward was trying to ease his guilt. No, David said firmly. That's what my great-grandfather thought too. He carried that guilt until the day he died. But my grandfather saw the truth. What truth? David took the photograph back and pointed to something Marcus had missed. In the background, partially obscured, was a man in a suit talking to someone off camera. That's the plant manager, Mr. Sterling. My great-grandfather didn't choose to fire your father. He was ordered to. The manager threatened to fire them both if he didn't comply. Marcus stared at the photo. He never told my father? He tried to, years later, but your family had moved, and he never found you. He spent 30 years carrying guilt for something that wasn't his choice. The implications hit Marcus like a tsunami. So your grandfather helped us because he was trying to honor his father's memory. And because he knew the truth, that sometimes good people are forced to make terrible choices by circumstances beyond their control. Marcus sank into his chair. Everything he'd believed about that time, about the betrayal that had shaped his worldview, was wrong. Your anger, your distrust, your need to control everything, it was all built on a misunderstanding. Why are you telling me this now? David's young eyes held wisdom far beyond his years. Because healing isn't just about forgiving others or even forgiving yourself. Sometimes it's about understanding that the very foundation of your pain was built on incomplete truth. My whole life, everything I became, was your response to a wound that never needed to happen. But that doesn't make your pain less real. It just means there's another layer of healing waiting for you. Marcus looked at the mirror again, but now he saw something different. Not just the scared 12-year-old boy, but also the man who'd spent decades fighting shadows that were never really there. Marcus sat in stunned silence for nearly 10 minutes, processing the revelation that had just shattered his life's narrative. The foundation of his anger, his distrust, his ruthless climb to power, all of it built on a misunderstanding. How long have you known this? He finally asked. Since I was 8. My grandfather told me the story when he realized I had abilities. He said someday I'd meet the son of Robert Sterling and I'd need to help him understand. Abilities? David hesitated for the first time since Marcus had met him. I can feel people's pain, not just emotional, physical too. It's why the nursing home residents get better around me. I help them release what they've been carrying. Marcus felt a strange tingling in his abdomen, different from the usual cancer pain. Is that what you're doing to me? I can't heal your cancer directly, but I can help you release the emotional poison that's been feeding it. Disease thrives on trapped energy, anger, guilt, fear, resentment. When we release those, sometimes the body remembers how to heal itself. That's not medically possible. Tell that to the 43 people at Sunset Manor who were given weeks to live and are still alive 2 years later. Marcus studied David's face. No arrogance, no mysticism, just simple truth spoken by a child who'd seen miracles that medicine couldn't explain. What do you need me to do? The hardest thing you've ever done. You need to let go of being right. About what? About everything. About your father being betrayed. About people being inherently selfish. About needing to hurt others before they hurt you. About deserving to die alone because of your choices. David moved closer, his young face serious. You've spent 46 years being right about how cruel the world is, and being right has made you one of the cruelest people in it. But what if you're wrong? What if the world is full of people like my great-grandfather, good people forced into impossible situations, trying their best with limited information? Marcus felt something cracking inside his chest, not breaking, opening. You want me to believe people are basically good? I want you to believe that you are basically good. That the 12-year-old boy who was scared and hurt didn't deserve what happened to him, and that the man you became was just trying to protect that boy the only way he knew how. David placed his small hand on Marcus's arm. The cancer started growing when you stopped believing you deserved love, when you decided that being alone was safer than risking betrayal. Your body has been trying to kill the part of you that's been killing your spirit. And if I let go, if I stop being right about everything, then maybe you can start being happy about something." Marcus looked at the mirror one more time. The frightened 12-year-old was still there, but now he could also see glimpses of who that boy might have become if he'd been allowed to trust, to love, to be vulnerable. "I don't know how to not be angry. It's been my fuel for so long." "Then let's start with something smaller. Can you forgive that scared little boy for making a promise he didn't know would hurt him?" Marcus picked up the mirror, looked directly into his own eyes, and spoke to the child he'd abandoned. "I forgive you. You were just trying to survive." The tingling in his abdomen intensified, and for the first time in months, the constant pain began to ease. The pain relief was immediate and startling. Marcus had lived with constant agony for months, but now something fundamental had shifted. Not just the physical sensation, but the emotional weight he'd carried like armor. "How is this possible?" Marcus asked, pressing his hand to his abdomen where the tumor had been a constant burning presence. "Your body is responding to what your heart just did," David explained. "You've been holding onto that pain for so long it became part of your identity. When you finally released it, your body started remembering what peace feels like." Marcus stood up for the first time in weeks without wincing. The movement felt foreign, like remembering how to breathe after holding your breath for decades. "But there's more work to do," David continued. "Forgiving that boy was the first step. Now you need to forgive the man he became." "What do you mean?" "Every person you hurt, every ruthless decision you made, every wall you built, that was all the scared 12-year-old trying to protect himself. Can you forgive Marcus Sterling for doing the best he could with the pain he was carrying?" This felt impossibly harder. The boy had been innocent, a victim, but the man... Marcus had made conscious choices to hurt people. "I knew what I was doing was wrong. I enjoyed some of it, the power, the control. Because it made you feel safe. For someone who spent his childhood feeling powerless, having complete control must have felt like survival." David walked to the window, gazing out at the city Marcus had conquered. "My grandfather told me something before he died. He said the people who hurt others the most are usually the ones who hurt the most themselves. Hurt people hurt people. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No, it doesn't, but it explains it. And understanding is the first step toward forgiveness." Marcus thought about each letter he'd read, each person who'd somehow found peace with what he'd done to them. They'd all moved beyond seeing him as a monster and recognized him as a wounded human being making wounded choices. "There's something else," David said quietly. "Something I need to tell you about why I really came to find you." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "What?" "My parents. The car accident that killed them 2 years ago." "What about it?" David turned from the window, tears in his young eyes for the first time since Marcus had met him. "The drunk driver who hit them. He was driving home from a bar after losing his job. His company had been bought out and liquidated by Sterling Industries." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "No." "Robert Chen. He'd worked at Chen Electronics for 20 years. Family business. You bought it, stripped the assets and sold the pieces. Mr. Chen started drinking, lost his wife, lost his house." Marcus sank back into his chair. "You're saying I'm responsible for your parents' death?" "I'm saying pain travels in circles until someone chooses to stop it." The room spun around Marcus. Everything David had done, the forgiveness, the healing, the patient teaching, all while knowing Marcus was indirectly responsible for destroying his world. "Why would you help me? Why would you try to save me?" David wiped his eyes and looked directly at Marcus. "Because my grandfather taught me that the only way to break the cycle is to choose love where others would choose revenge. If I let hatred consume me the way it consumed you, then Mr. Chen's pain just keeps spreading." Marcus stared at this extraordinary child who'd chosen healing over vengeance. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to live, really live. Not just survive your cancer, but become the man that scared 12-year-old boy deserved to grow up to be." Marcus wept like he hadn't since childhood. Deep, body-shaking sobs, that seemed to come from a place deeper than grief, from the very core of his being finally cracking open after decades of calcification. David didn't speak, didn't comfort, just witnessed. Somehow his presence made it safe for Marcus to fall apart completely. "I destroyed your family," Marcus gasped between sobs. "I killed your parents." "No," David said firmly. "Mr. Chen's choices killed my parents. Your choices created the pain that led to his choices. But choices belong to the people who make them. How can you not hate me? Because hatred would just create more pain, and I've seen enough pain." Marcus looked up at David through his tears. "What happens now? How do I live with what I've done?" "The same way every human lives with their mistakes. You acknowledge them, you learn from them, and you choose differently going forward." "It's too late. I'm dying. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, you have today. And tomorrow, if you get it. What will you do with the time you have left?" For the first time in 40 years, Marcus Sterling had no plan, no strategy, no 5-year projections or market analysis. Just a simple question. What kind of man did he want to be with whatever time remained? "I want to help people instead of hurting them." Then start small. One person. One action. Marcus thought about his staff. Sarah, his assistant, who'd worked for him for 15 years and never received a kind word. The security guards who he'd never acknowledged as human beings. The cleaning crew who made his world spotless while remaining invisible to him. "I want to call Mr. Chen." David shook his head. "He died 6 months ago. Liver failure." Another wave of guilt crashed over Marcus. His family then, I want to help his family. Why? The question stopped Marcus cold. Why did he want to help? To ease his guilt? To buy his way out of responsibility? Or because it was genuinely the right thing to do? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Maybe all the wrong reasons at first, but maybe I can learn the right reasons." David smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from him. "That's the most honest thing you've said since I met you." Over the next hour, David helped Marcus draft a letter to Robert Chen's surviving family. Not asking for forgiveness, that felt too much like seeking absolution. Just acknowledging responsibility and offering support without conditions. What if they reject it? What if they tell me to go to hell? Then you respect their choice. Healing isn't about getting the response you want. It's about doing what's right regardless of the response. Marcus sealed the letter with hands that felt steadier than they had in months. The physical pain was almost completely gone now, replaced by a different sensation, hope mixed with terrifying vulnerability. "David, what's happening to me? Medically, I mean. This morning I could barely stand." "Your body is responding to your heart opening." "But Marcus, you need to understand something important. This isn't magic. It's not guaranteed. The cancer might still win." "But you think there's a chance?" "I think there's always a chance when someone chooses love over fear. But the real healing isn't about whether you live or die. It's about who you choose to be while you're here." Marcus nodded, understanding for the first time that survival and living were completely different things. He'd spent 40 years surviving. Maybe it was time to learn how to live. 3 days later, Marcus Sterling did something unprecedented. He walked through every floor of his corporate headquarters, speaking personally to each employee. Not corporate speak or strategic messaging. Real conversation. "Maria," he said to the woman who'd cleaned his office for 8 years, "I never thanked you. You make my world more beautiful every day." She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. In 8 years, he'd never acknowledged her existence. "Mr. Sterling, are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling human for the first time in decades." Word spread quickly through the building. Marcus Sterling was acting strange. Some employees speculated he was having a breakdown. Others wondered if this was some new management strategy. Sarah, his assistant, was the most suspicious. "What's really going on, Marcus? The board is asking questions. Schedule a meeting with the executive team, all of them, this afternoon." 2 hours later, Marcus faced his senior staff, the people who'd helped him build an empire through aggressive acquisitions and ruthless competition. I'm making changes to how we operate, he began without preamble. Effective immediately, we're shifting from a model based on acquisition and control to one based on partnership and growth. CFO Richard Hayes spoke first. Marcus, this is a $5 billion company. You can't just decide to be altruistic overnight. Our shareholders will benefit more from sustainable ethical practices than from our current scorched earth approach. The room erupted in concerned voices. Marcus let them talk, then raised his hand for silence. I know this seems sudden. You have every right to be concerned about my judgment, but I'm not asking you to trust my feelings. I'm asking you to trust the data. He'd spent the previous night researching companies that had successfully transitioned from aggressive to collaborative business models. The financial results were compelling. We're going to start by reaching out to 3 companies we've targeted for hostile takeover. Instead of buying them out, we're going to offer partnership deals. Marcus, Marketing Director Jennifer Walsh interrupted, that's not how we've ever operated. No, it's not. And look where our current approach has gotten us. High profits, low employee satisfaction, constant legal battles, and a reputation that makes meaningful partnerships impossible. He pulled up financial projections on the conference room screen. What if I told you we could increase revenue by 40% while reducing legal costs by 80% and improving employee retention by 90%? The room fell silent as they studied the numbers. How? Sarah asked. By becoming the kind of company people want to work with instead of the kind they fear. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a complete transformation strategy, not just changing business practices, but changing the fundamental culture of Sterling Industries. Some of you won't be comfortable with this direction. I understand. Anyone who wants to leave will receive a generous severance package and my personal recommendation. Nobody moved to leave, but Marcus could see the wheels turning in their minds. I need to know, Richard finally said. Is this about your health? Are you dying? Marcus considered lying, maintaining his image of invulnerability. Instead, he chose truth. I was dying. Maybe I still am. But I realized that building an empire while destroying your soul isn't success. It's the most expensive form of failure imaginable. He looked around the room at faces he'd worked with for years, but never really seen as human beings. I want to find out what we're capable of when we're building something instead of tearing things down. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but something had shifted. For the first time in Sterling Industries' history, the leadership team was having conversations about values, not just value. That evening, Marcus called David. How do you feel? David asked. Terrified, excited, more alive than I've been in years. And physically, Marcus paused to assess. The constant fatigue was gone. His appetite had returned. The yellow tinge to his skin was fading. Better. Much better. But David, what if I relapse? What if this doesn't last? Then you'll handle it the same way you're handling everything else now. One choice at a time. 6 months later, Marcus Sterling was declared cancer-free. His oncologist called it unprecedented spontaneous remission. But Marcus knew the truth. Healing had started the moment he chose love over fear. The Sterling Foundation became the largest provider of emotional healing programs for terminally ill patients. David, now 13, served as the youngest advisor in medical history, training doctors to address spiritual pain alongside physical symptoms. Marcus married Sarah, who'd seen his transformation from the beginning. They adopted David officially, giving him the family he'd lost while gaining the son who'd saved them both. The ripple effects continued expanding. Sterling Industries' new partnership model revolutionized their sector. Employee satisfaction soared. Profits doubled. 3 former competitors became collaborative partners, creating jobs instead of eliminating them. But the most profound change was personal. Marcus Sterling, who'd spent 40 years afraid of vulnerability, now spoke openly about his journey at medical conferences worldwide. True healing, he'd tell audiences, begins when we stop running from our own humanity. David would always add with a smile, sometimes the medicine we need most comes in the smallest packages. What did you think of this incredible transformation? Subscribe and hit that like button if this story touched your heart.